And then things came closer to home, much closer. On October 16, 1943, the Nazis arrested 1,259 Jews in Rome, most of whom were women and children. And since we find ourselves in the middle of the Paris 2024 Olympics, let's start with the Berlin Olympics of 1936 and the fact that they actually went ahead, because by then Hitler's dictatorship was self-evident. And of course the central question is why? If there's no penalty to not participating and no background in the SS type of anti-Semitism, why did in fact 85% participate? Until recently, Jews hadn't been eager to go to Palestine because Jews are mainly dedicated to commerce. And commerce remains quite profitable for them when they live amongst Christians. But if, on the contrary, all and only the Jews come together, you have an enormous gathering of swindlers while lacking those to be swindled.
Welcome to History for the Curious. I'm Mena Reisner, and I host the internationally renowned lecturer, dynamic historian, and tour guide, Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch. Experience our history, confront dilemmas, and reveal the untold stories of 3,000 years of Jewish heritage, from Paris to Cairo, from the Russian Tsar to Maimonides, and from the Sinai Revelation to the French Revolution. Join the fastest growing Jewish history podcast in the world by subscribing to this channel and discovering the events that have shaped us into who we are today.
It has to be said, he is not alone in his regard for the Jews, because the IOC president, who has this really long name, Comte Henri de Baillet-Latour, wrote to Brundage and said, and I quote, "I am not personally fond of Jews and of the Jewish influence." So he had a lot of friends in high places. And Brundage warned American athletes in their publication that they should not become involved in the present Jew-Nazi altercation. Most revealingly, however, Brundage wanted to use the boycott controversy for fundraising. As he wrote, "The fact that the Jews are against us will arouse interest amongst thousands of people who have never subscribed before." And he went on in March 36 to write to the Jewish millionaire Albert Lasker, complaining that a large number of misguided Jews still persist in attempting to hamper the activities of the American Olympic Committee. The result, of course, is increased support from the 120 million non-Jews in the United States for this patriotic enterprise. And he suggested that Lasker, if he were to help finance American participation in the Olympic Games, would decrease anti-Semitism in the United States. Lasker refused to be blackmailed and wrote back to Brundage, "You gratuitously insult not only Jews, but the millions of patriotic Christians in America for whom you venture to speak without warrant." And then, to top it all, there was the question of the 4x100 meters relay squad, which may well have involved him, because the team included sprinters Sam Stoller and Marty Glickman, who were both Jewish. Both men were removed from the relay squad at the last minute. They were the only American athletes who went to Berlin and did not compete. Now, after the Games, which had increased his admiration, Brundage's admiration for Germany, he spoke at a speech to the pro-Nazi German-American Bund in Madison Square Garden, and said, 5 years ago the Germans were demoralized, today they are united, we can learn much from Germany. And in what can only be termed ironic, he was president of the International Olympics Committee 36 years later, when the Olympics returned to Germany, to Munich, in 1972. And when intolerance against the Jews featured with the infamous massacre of 11 Israeli athletes, Brundage is known for his speech at the memorial the day after the massacre, where he said the Games must go on, and made an odious comparison between the death of 11 Jews and the boycott of the Rhodesian athletics team from the Olympic Games. And he said, "The Games of the 20th Olympiad have been subjected to 2 savage attacks. We also lost the Rhodesian battle against political blackmail, meaning that certain sportsmen weren't allowed to participate." And he later said, once again I quote, "I was severely criticized for that," meaning for comparing the two. "But the fact is, I did it on purpose. There was a principle involved, and that although it was a terrible thing that some lives were lost, principles are just as important as human lives." And in May 2012, the independent newspaper here in England dubbed him the ancient International Olympics Committee emperor, anti-Semite, and Nazi sympathizer. In a strange twist to this tale, though, 80 years after the Berlin Olympics, the 14th European Maccabi Games in 2015, with 2,300 athletes, only Jews, took place in the Berlin Stadium itself.
Wow. Clearly it was very offensive and upsetting, but this all happened without any loss of life, so we wouldn't really call it part of the Holocaust itself, would we?
I guess, but it points to anti-Semitism in certain quarters, which brings me to my next point. Let's move to focus on Germany and the war itself. There is an ongoing debate amongst historians to what degree did the average German know what was going on, and to what degree did Germany as a people support Hitler. So after the war, there was an immediate turnabout, and the narrative was that there were Germans and there were Nazis, like a few of them. They're not even called German Nazis, just Nazis. Everybody else in Germany and in Austria was simply a victim. Yeah, right. But 2 generations down the line, when it is clear that anti-Semitic activities were also carried out by ordinary Germans, the question arises as to why. And I would guess you could call it 2 main divergent views which emerge, both from professors of history. They are Christopher Browning and William Goldhagen in their respective books. Interestingly, both of them center around the same group. They are the main part of Browning's book, 500 German men in the Reserve Police Battalion 101. They carried out the murder of approximately 85,000 Jews, men, women, and children in Eastern Europe. Now, Browning describes these men, and this is a description both historians agree to, that they are conscripted into a reserve battalion to perform unexplained duties behind the front lines in Poland. When they were conscripted in Germany, they did not know where and why they were going. They arrive, and they are assigned the task of basically collecting Jews in small towns in Poland, one town after another, and murdering them. And obviously, that meant putting a bullet in the back of the victim and rolling them into a mass grave, which was a process that was so close up that blood and other matter splashed onto the shooter's uniform and then into their face. And it's important, in fact, it's crucial to note Brown's use of the term ordinary. His book title is Ordinary Men, because historians had assumed previously that Nazi killers, the Einsatzgruppen, would have been young men who reached their adolescence within the Nazi state and under the full impact of Nazi education and training were fervent Nazis, members of the party. And Browning's killers don't conform to that at all. They were older, less likely to belong to the party, never mind the SS itself, and they were so uncommitted to the cause that by 1941 most of them were still at home trying to avoid duty in the military or in any Nazi organization.
So they weren't former military, these people?
No, not necessarily. Some of them could have seen action in the German army a long time prior to this, although remember that between the wars the German army was, by the Versailles Treaty terms, of a limited size. So they end up in Eastern Europe, and basically one morning they're given their first assignment to kill. And they are told they do not have to participate if they find it objectionable. Once again, both historians agree to this. The commander of the unit gave his men the choice of opting out of murdering Jews, partisans, communists, whatever they were, but the majority chose not to exercise that option. Browning estimates maybe 10 to 15%, which means that approximately 85% of these ordinary men methodically killed, in some cases even enthusiastically, wherever and whenever they were told to do so. And everybody agrees that the people in this battalion regarded themselves as honourable individuals. They described themselves that way on occasion, but that they participated in mass murder. And of course, the central question is why? If there's no penalty to not participating and no background in the SS type of anti-Semitism, why did, in fact, 85% participate?
Was there any real research carried out about these people, trying to understand their mindset?
You can't. By which I mean, you can't ask Germans after the war whether they actually supported Hitler before or during the war. This became a complete taboo subject. So you have research in terms of documents, but not in terms of people. And Browning argued that the men of Unit 101 agreed to willingly participate in these massacres out of a basic obedience to authority and out of peer pressure, not out of a primal hatred. Whereas Goldhagen says that there was a German psyche and historical upbringing which created what he calls an eliminationist ideology regarding the Jews.
Browning's theory is what we heard mostly during the trial subsequent to the war. People saying they were acting out of obedience, and even high-ranking Nazi officials used that excuse.
Yes, although the addition of the peer pressure is something that is new. He basically says they went along with it because everyone was doing it. Right? Now, I have to say, both books are very well written, but neither argument is conclusive or completely convincing. I don't believe it's fair to say that people kill children in a foreign country that they have no connection to out of peer pressure, especially if they're given the opportunity to opt out in a speech by their own commanding officer. And equally, is it credible to assume that Germany, uniquely in all of Europe, had an inbuilt psychological, pathological hatred of the Jews? And I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. There were a lot of Germans who supported Hitler's ideals, who knew what was going on and carried it out. And then there were others who did what they did, maybe out of, so to speak, fear, or because they were sheep, or because they were looking for a better economic life, all of which makes a very powerful cocktail. And perhaps at some future date we will examine these types of people further.
Just remembering our podcast with Douglas Murray, where we asked him this specific question, more particularly about the massacre more recently in Gaza, in Israel. We asked him how human beings fall to a level where the ordinary citizen is capable of such heinous crimes. And his answer was there's always been evil. The monster is real. I'm just wondering if we have a different sort of, or a parallel explanation as to, so to speak, ordinary citizens who we're describing are capable.
Right, so the question is what we mean that evil is around. Well, you're still choosing evil, and the question is why. But what is clear is that much of the reason for their passive support or even hesitant support for Hitler's ideas was because the scapegoat was the Jew. The Jew is someone about whom people easily agree that they should be victimized. This is part of Golos. We will read, potentially in Eicha a week from now, Sechi u'mo'is tesimeni. I have become an object of disgust and repulsion in the eyes of the non-Jews. Hoyisi sechik, I am the object of their mockery. And the denial of the Jew to be treated as an equal, as a human being, to be seen as human. For 2,000 years in Europe, there's one influential group that denied us rights, that accused us of crimes which are too incredible to be objectively possible. They were responsible for our expulsion from various countries, they denigrated Judaism, they destroyed our synagogues, and they kept this up for 1,700 years to an almost total degree. Now, their success varied from country to country, but their activities and teachings never changed. They are Christianity, the church. This portrayal of the Jew leads their community to indifference and ultimately to hatred. The Holocaust would not have been possible across an entire continent if there had not been 1,700 years of continuous anti-Semitism from the church. The church's anti-Semitism itself is a necessary cause of the Holocaust.
It's quite a powerful statement, almost accusation. Are you saying that the church, effectively saying the church is responsible for the Holocaust?
No. A necessary cause isn't the same as sufficient cause. The church itself would not have initiated, nor would it have carried out a program for the annihilation of the Jews. There is an excellent book on this subject called Constantine's Sword by James Carroll. And with regards to this particular relationship between the church and the Nazi ideology, he rejects the idea that Christian anti-Judaism leads to a Holocaust, but he argues very credibly that the church's long history of Jew hatred laid the foundations for it to be possible, because anti-Semitism was an integral part of church doctrine and its liturgy. Divine justification of the Christian Bible that Jews were Christ killers. The church spread anti-Semitism across the continent. In medieval Europe, it was universal. And even after the Reformation in the 16th century, where you now have the Catholics and the Protestant churches, basically the only thing that these two adversaries agreed upon was anti-Semitism. You have Luther with his book infamously on the Jews and their lies, and this echoes the Catholic Church's campaign against the Jews of Spain 50